Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Nature Talks 2024. So excited to see you. I'm Frogart Ryan, the State Director for the Nature Conservancy right here in Connecticut, and couldn't be more thrilled. We have a full house. We have a great set of speakers and moderator. Our topic, of course, today is the ocean's future is our future. And nature and the oceans really definitely depend on us and need us more than ever. And I know it's close to your heart. And I go for a walk at the ocean pretty much every day, Lighthouse Point Park. And I think it's not only good for our spiritual being, for our physical well-being, but so many people depend on it. I think it's good for the soul. And of course for our economy, businesses, from boating, offshore wind, you name it. And we're going to dive into that today. So thank you again for coming. And before I introduce our moderator today, Rochelle J., I want to thank two people who have made this event happen. And that's Susan Walschlager and Tebben. Can you raise your hand here for a second? Big round of applause. All right. And I'm going to hand things over to Rochelle J. She is NBC's Connecticut meteorologist, has been in this role since 2021, and about 10 years prior, or 10 years in totality, has been a broadcaster. She's absolutely fabulous. So in her free time, she spends a lot of time with young professionals, career professionals in the beginning of the career, and we're grateful for that. So without further ado, please help me welcome Rochelle J.
Okay. All right, thank you so much, Frogart. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the invite to be a part of this. I mean, as a meteorologist, you know, we look at climate, we look at the ocean, and obviously the ocean can completely change the weather forecast down here in Groton versus what it can be up in Hartford. So we know how much that affects weather forecasts and everything else when it comes to our community. So I'm really excited to be a part of this and to join all of you and learn right alongside all of you as well. So I definitely want to get started. Let's introduce our speakers. First is Sally McGee, who is the Director of Climate and Strategic Initiatives for the Nature Conservancy's Global Aquaculture Program. Her areas of work include the Shellfish Growers Climate Coalition, sustaining oyster aquaculture and restoration in the U.S., and seaweed aquaculture in Chile. She also has served as TNC's Northeast Marine Program Director, working with hundreds of shellfish farmers in every state where shellfish is grown. Previously, Sally held a 100-ton U.S. Coast Guard license that she used in the North Atlantic, Caribbean, and North and South Pacific Oceans. She also developed, owned, and operated an oyster farm, Sixpenny Oysters, in Noank. And let's also give a warm welcome to Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, a renowned marine biologist, writer, policy expert, scientist, and teacher. She co-founded and leads the nonprofit Urban Ocean Lab, a think tank for the future of coastal cities, and is the Roux Distinguished Scholar at Bowdoin College. As Dr. Johnson works to help create the best possible climate future, she's also co-edited the best-selling anthology, All We Can See. She co-created and co-hosted the Spotify and Gimlet podcast, How to Save a Planet, and co-authored the Blue New Deal, a roadmap for including the ocean in climate policy. Dr. Johnson's newest book was just released, and the title is, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. So of course, we're all hoping that we do get it right. There is a lot at stake for all of us and our oceans. So I want to start with a question that's probably on most of our minds. What do you see as the most urgent issues and challenges? Dr. Johnson, we'll start with your thoughts on this.
Oh man, I was hoping you would go first. It seems like we're in this new phase of reimagining our relationship with the ocean, right? It had been one primarily driven in a lot of our minds by fishing and then overfishing and then fisheries management and recovery of some fish populations. And now there's like a new wave of potential industrialization of the ocean that I think a lot of us are sort of worried about the direction that will go. But certainly we need to figure out renewable energy offshore wind is primarily what's going on right now, but we may have other forms of energy coming online soon, whether that's tidal or wave energy. There's really interesting innovation happening there. And I was hoping you would go first because I think the aquaculture piece of it is super interesting. As someone who now lives in Maine, I hang out with oyster farmers all the time. Many of them are also now growing seaweed. That's becoming much more common. They like to call themselves the Napa Valley of oysters up there. I'm sure you guys would give them a run for their money. And so it's very interesting to think about these uses of the ocean that are expanding, physically expanding, and what that would mean more broadly. I mean, one of my first jobs out of graduate school was as executive director of a nonprofit philanthropic foundation called Waite Institute, where I worked with Caribbean island governments on ocean zoning. So I'm really interested in this idea of like, how can we make a plan for the ocean, just like we have in a lot of places on land with, what's on land, commercial, residential, industrial, protected areas, et cetera. We don't really have a plan for the ocean in that way. There's been huge resistance from all sectors about having a plan. It's as if people think if there's no plan, I can do whatever I want wherever, and like that doesn't work either. It just makes it harder to get through the permitting and stuff. I'm gonna stop talking in big hand wavy generalities and turn it over to you to like really get into it.
All right, I'll give it a try. So what's most urgent? So like on a bad day, I think about, feeding a growing human population and stopping pouring carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and putting a tourniquet on climate change. And it's all urgent. And I spent a long time feeling really pretty paralyzed by how sad and overwhelming all these things are. It's all urgent, but feeling that way is just not a way forward. It's just not. And so, partly, truly, just thinking about the way you write and think about and talk about it, the most urgent thing is the thing that we can do. It's the action that we can take, and the thing that doesn't make us feel overwhelmed or hopeless or paralyzed. Every day I work with people through the Nature Conservancy who are doing that, especially shellfish farmers. And shellfish are as close to a carbon neutral food as you can get, plus they do a lot of really good things for the environment. So they're really important partners for the Nature Conservancy. So Rochelle, you mentioned SOAR, Supporting Oyster Aquaculture and Restoration. That's a project that I work on. And one of the things we do is we fund these small projects all over the country, including some projects here in Connecticut and just across Long Island Sound in New York, where like an internship here in Connecticut on a farm, on a shellfish farm, so that farmers are learning farming skills here. And over in New York, figuring out ways on a farm over in New York where they're figuring out how not to lose their aquaculture gear, so there's less pollution plastic. And also over in New York, they're adding seaweed to their shellfish farm. Things like that. And so we're not doing things just here, we're doing things like I was down in Georgia last week. And so down there, we're doing another internship project to kind of help kids in high school figure out if that's the direction that they want to go into shellfish farming. And shell recycling, so that we're getting the shell from the restaurants back to
the sea islands to build habitat so that we're protecting those islands from storm surge. So all those little dots on the map are little things, but they're urgent, to your question, they're urgent for those people, and those people care a lot about those things. So we're investing in those things. And so they're not just happening in those places, we're then taking what those people have done and then sharing them with other people so that hopefully they'll do it again and do it better next time.
Yeah. It's maybe worth emphasizing just how bad climate change is for the ocean. I'm sure most of you know this, but there's a few facts that really stick out to me. One is that the ocean has absorbed over 90% of the heat that we've trapped by burning fossil fuels and all the greenhouse gases that releases and traps heat in the atmosphere. 90% of that excess heat has been absorbed by the ocean. The ocean has, because of that, warmed a few degrees Fahrenheit. But if it were not for the ocean, the air would be something like 97 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. So the ocean is really buffering the impacts of climate. So thank you to the ocean. But also clearly that warming is not good. Just like we are adapted to a fairly narrow temperature range, species in the ocean are having to move towards the poles. You're seeing fish ranges shift towards the poles several kilometers a year. On average, you're seeing, of course, things like coral that can't get up and swim away start to fry in place. And the ocean is not just absorbing the heat, it's absorbing the carbon dioxide as well. And the ocean has absorbed about a third of the carbon dioxide that's been emitted by burning fossil fuels, and that has changed the very chemistry of seawater. So we're talking about changing the pH of the entire ocean because of burning fossil fuels. And when you change the pH of the ocean, this is not good for shellfish that are trying to grow their shells. This is not good for corals that are trying to grow their bodies, their skeletons. And a lot of different species navigate by scent in the ocean. We're changing essentially the smell of seawater and screwing up other ecological dynamics there. So if we need some bad climate facts about the ocean to get us started about what the stakes are, that is why this is so urgent, because the ocean is a major driver of our climate system. Ocean currents drive temperature patterns around the world. The reason that Scotland doesn't have a lot of snow is because of the Gulf Stream of warm water coming up, right, from more tropical regions. So as these currents start to slow down, all sorts of wacky things are going to be happening. So the urgency is very clear, and I love that we're both sort of immediately jumping towards the solutions and what we can do about it, because I kind of just try to summarize this really fast and then get moving. I mean, you'll notice in the book there's a reality check chapter right at the beginning, and it summarizes all the major bad climate news in 3 pages, and then the next 450 pages are just so what are we going to do about it? But yeah, there's the short edition there.
I love it. And at any point, you two just bounce off of each other. It doesn't, I might ask Dr. Johnson or Sally a question, but please, you're having a conversation with each other and with everyone here. So that was really amazing. And let's keep that kind of energy going. We're kind of already leading into the next question, which is what are the most significant ways that the ocean is impacting our communities, and what's changed in that relationship over time? So either one of you.
One of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is sea level rise. That's actually the secret reason that I started Urban Ocean Lab, because I thought we're just not dealing with the fact that it's projected around 13 million Americans will have to move because of sea level rise in the next few decades. We don't have a plan for that. There is no robust federal framework for helping people relocate. We're having problems dealing with it, 1 or 2 houses at a time, let alone millions of people, and then thinking about where they're going to go. What communities are going to be receiving them? Are they going to be capable of welcoming folks who have to relocate? And so this is what Urban Ocean Lab is going to be doing a lot of work on in 2025, helping to build with a bunch of other groups that we collaborate with a set of policy recommendations for what the framework would need to be to enable this to happen in a way that's somewhat orderly and just, because if we let this just unfold, I think we can guess who is going to have the resources to relocate and who's going to get screwed as the rising sea they did very little to cause starts to encroach on their communities. So, 5 years ago, people really weren't talking about that very much. I think it's become something that people are like, oh, I guess we should deal with that. So I thought it was going to have to be a Trojan horse of a conversation, but now we're just having that policy conversation, and FEMA and other federal agencies and state entities are starting to embrace the fact that we cannot, in fact, hold back the entire ocean with walls, which is, a lot of, I think we've all probably seen cute engineering proposals that are like, we'll just build a wall. Well, that's not going to work at any reasonable scale. So what do we do? And I think just zooming out a tiny bit, I think the moment that we're in calls for incredible creativity and ingenuity on the part of our species and collaboration, which I don't know that we've ever succeeded at the scale and speed that we need to do now. So it'll be very exciting to watch and participate in. But yeah, we've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah, I think you were talking about like building a wall. I think the relationship with the ocean has been just that loss of connection has been in place for such a long time that we've just ignored or walled off the ocean for such a long time and pretended that humans are in control somehow, or that we could force or will the ocean to.
It's a cute idea.
Yeah, that we could control it, or with a wall, or that we could somehow will it to give more if we want it to. I worked a lot in both in fisheries management before I shifted over to working more with aquaculture, and I saw this kind of just wanting more from the ocean than it could possibly give a lot, especially when I was a member of the New England Fishery Management Council for 9 years.
That is some serious business. Do you guys have any idea how hard that is?
And yeah, it was, so the Fishery Management Council comes up with rules for fishing in federal waters, so that's out to 200 miles offshore. So around here, that's fish like cod, flounders, herring, those kind of species. And so regulating wild harvest fisheries, it's a lot of saying no, like don't fish there, catch less, don't catch that fish is too small, throw that fish back. And it's a lot of arguing between scientists and fishermen. It's a lot of arguing between fishermen and regulators, and it's just lots and lots of arguing. And it's important work, and it's still important work, and I'm grateful for the people who continue to do it. So I'm responding to the question about relationships really in community. But for me, it became exhausting and really, really hard. My partner will attest to that. One of the hardest points was we had to have extra local police patrols around our house because of threats from people who were unhappy about a vote that I cast on a fishery management council limit on how much catch of a particular species. So relationships, how can you have a relationship with someone, and under those circumstances? So, around wild harvest fisheries, you just can't. It's impossible. So I term limited off of the Fishery Management Council, and I wanted to get back connected to the water, and have a new relationship to the ocean. And that's when I started learning about shellfish farming, right here in Groton, which is where I live. And overfishing and the fishery management thing, kind of led me to think about food and the ocean, really from a different perspective for both shellfish and seaweed, in a much more connected way. Working on and with the ocean, much more in sync with the ocean, not just taking from it, but giving to. So, thanks.
So we've kind of already started talking about this.
Can I butt in again?
Please.
I just had another thought about this. There's so much to this, community question, right? Because I mean, the reason that I got started in ocean work is because my dad's from Jamaica. And just hearing about how that culture was so intertwined with the sea is something many of us can relate to, right? Everyone who lives on the coast is or has someone who is like really personally, spiritually invested in the health of that ocean, in the relationship with that ocean, or their economy, their livelihoods, the culture piece, I feel like gets left out a lot. I think that's part of the resistance that you get to from fishermen is not just the bottom line economics of it all, but like this reluctance to change the way that people are used to interacting with the sea. But on the flip side of that relationship is like the sweetness of wanting to have a healthy ocean because, you know, my dad used to be a track star and go train on the beaches of Jamaica, and then you would catch a fish and grill it with your friends. But you can't do that anymore because there aren't enough. And so you're losing an important element of culture, right? If grandparents can't take their grandchildren fishing, you go out all day and you catch nothing. It's not fun anymore, right? And there's a million other examples of that. So I think it is important to think not just about sort of the dollars and cents of it all, the health and safety of it all, but also just like, we have a lot of feelings about the ocean, and that's coloring the policies we do or do not put in place, and what people support and the ways forward that are palatable to different communities has a lot to do, I think, with the cultural context too. We just have a lot of feelings about this stuff. Yeah.
For sure, and kind of speaking on that way forward, and I love that we've mentioned it so many times already, we've just got started. So what are some of the solutions that may exist that are a little bit more out of the box? Dr. Johnson, you can speak to, you know, some of the solutions that are coming out of the Urban Ocean Lab. Yeah, either one of you, some
Please.
out of the box solutions.
You first.
Well, you're the Urban Ocean Lab.
Where should we begin? I actually, there's a chapter in the book called A Blue New Deal. And I think so much about nature-based solutions or nature-inspired solutions. So often we are sort of trained to think about like technology and innovation and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't really interest me. Like the Silicon Valley version of the future, like I'm not invested in that. And so I think a lot about solutions that are based on photosynthesis, to be honest. I mean, that is the most magical rebalancing of the carbon cycle we could imagine. And that is very much happening in the ocean too. Phytoplankton doesn't get nearly as much love as it deserves. Oh, snaps for phytoplankton. Yes. And also seaweed, right? We're having this like renaissance of appreciation of seaweed, or just birth, not rebirth in the US of that. And I think that's really exciting and promising as these sources of extremely low carbon footprint food, shifting culture to adapt our palates to these food sources that are becoming more prevalent. But I mean, one of my favorite ocean facts is that wetlands and mangroves can absorb something like 5 times more carbon per acre than a forest on land, than a rainforest, which is something they do not get nearly enough credit for, right? So when I look to the ocean, I primarily see solutions that we're missing or not appreciating. The latest assessment is that ocean climate actions like scaling offshore renewable energy, decarbonizing shipping, eating low-carbon seafood, and conserving and restoring coastal ecosystems could comprise 35% of our climate solution.
Yeah, and people, myself included, really want oysters and oyster reefs to be carbon sinks. They want them to be like the solution, a solution for climate change. And the fact is, we don't quite know, and they're not quite. But there are things that they do that are really important. You know, they buffer storm impacts. They They filter lots of water. They protect those other habitats that you were just mentioning. They provide, really low carbon food. They do all these fabulous things. One of the things that I often have to think about, because I work with lots of shellfish farmers, is let's not overpromise something even though we want it so badly. Because there is so much that's in the package of one oyster or an intact oyster reef that it provides, because it provides a lot. So.
All right, so the next question. You were speaking of, you look to nature for solutions, but what is nature telling us in terms of climate change effects? Both of you.
Cut it out.
Just.
Yeah, that's what nature said.
So perhaps either one of you or both of you could speak to biomimicry and explain what that is.
I'm not a biomimicry person. I knew this question was coming. I was like, well, oyster reefs are not really mimicking, they just are. And they, like I was saying, they do all sorts, all of these fabulous things, and left to their own devices, and with some help from nature, or from humans, they can do all these wonderful things, serving as a barrier to storms and preventing erosion. And sequestering some carbon, but in terms of a net, they're probably not a net carbon sink. But
what this makes me think of is the seawalls and jetties, etc., that are now being designed to mimic the more complex and like interstitial spaces that you would have in a normal oyster reef or etc., so that these concrete constructions can actually be home to more biodiversity. There's a project in New York City, some of you have probably heard of, Living Breakwaters, that Scape Studio is doing, to say like, okay, if we're gonna put stuff out there, let's mimic the topology of these reef ecosystems, because oyster reefs and coral reefs are all of these little nooks and crannies are home to all these other species. And so how can we, if we are going to build things out there, make sure that we're also, mimicking nature enough to provide good homes.
it's not a flat wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked a lot about the water. We're obviously beautiful location here at Avery Point looking over the water, but let's talk a little bit farther inland. So how can we connect people who may live a little ways from the coastline or far away from the coastline to ocean issues and action?
Yeah. So I grew up in Ohio, and my dad grew up on a farm where they grew corn and soybeans and wheat and sheep and cows, and my grandmother had like this huge kitchen garden, and so I spent time as a child on that farm, which gave me a huge appreciation for where food came from, but it gave me also an appreciation for what happens to natural systems when you ask too much of them. So this was like in the 70s and the 80s, and so the same kind of stories from food producers being connected, but then disconnected from the natural systems, and then disconnected from their human communities, are understood in Ohio as much as they're understood here. And so it's not a stretch at all to make the parallel, make the connection, especially when you're talking about food production. So it's the same kind of story.
I have a different, geographic origin story. I grew up in Brooklyn, and it felt as far away from the ocean as Ohio. I never thought of New York Harbor as a place where things lived. I never really went to the coast. I learned to swim in the Florida Keys. I got on an airplane to go to the ocean, where it was warm and clear and turquoise. And to me, that was the ocean, not like New York City, even though, New York is actually an archipelago of like 36 islands, and it has over 500 miles of coastline. It never occurred to me that that was actually something in my own backyard. And that relationship with the water in New York is starting to change because architecturally we had turned our backs to the water for so long. It was this industrialized coastline. There weren't really places to access it. But now I walk around and there's like all these coastal parks and everyone's hanging out and having picnics and they're like renting sea kayaks. And I'm sure many of you are fans of the Billion Oyster Project, which has done so much to help people reconnect with that waterway and think about just us as part of this incredible ecosystem. But I think people who live even in Los Angeles, in the inner city, never go to the beach. I mean, when I was in graduate school in Southern California, we had a group of students of color from high schools in Compton come to San Diego to like hang out at the beach and learn about ocean science with a bunch of like dorky grad students, and a lot of them had never been to the beach before. So I think we can, you know, there's an even bigger issue of disconnection, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and we don't necessarily have to go that far geographically in order to reconnect. But from the Midwest perspective, I think I always think about the downstream impacts of farming. I think about how it happens in the Midwest affects the Gulf. How all of those excess fertilizers and eroded topsoil and pesticides and other poisons end up in the Gulf, often causing these algae blooms that lead to eutrophication and dead zones, right? Where there's all of this, everything's out of balance. There's not enough oxygen in the deep ocean and fish are trying to leave these dead zones, right? And it's just, there are these connections not of like, oh, the ocean means something to me, but there are literal downstream effects that I know people in the Midwest do not want to be responsible for. So figuring out other ways of farming is actually critical for the health of the ocean as well.
Well, I think making those connections between people and the place where the food comes from helps that to happen.
Yeah.
Because the way farming happens now, that connection to what's happening, the way farming happens in the Midwest now, there's not that incentive or the connection to be made to what happens in the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, no one wants to take responsibility for that, that's for sure.
All right, so kind of on that same note, we're talking about farming. Let's kind of, get that from the farm almost to the table, so to say. Let's talk a little bit more about food. So Sally, can you tell us more about the intersection of food health and our growing population, something we've also touched on a little bit, something that exacerbates the climate change effects, but is sometimes left out of the conversation. I know you've done some extensive work in the fisheries field, and obviously we've touched on that a bit here.
Yeah, so I would say like something that's kind of left out of the conversation, even when we're talking about and people are aware of shellfish are a good choice because they're they're a low trophic species, so it's a good choice. But if you're buying a shellfish that was grown in the Pacific Northwest and you're here, then what are you doing? So I would say buy your food from close by.
Also, it's delicious here.
It is.
We have Fisher's Island oysters here, which I can vouch for their oysters being delicious.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other good oyster farmers in the audience, but
Yeah.
I haven't had them.
So as far as like figuring out like what the carbon footprint is of a shellfish farm, that's something actually that we're working on because shellfish farmers want to know. So another project that I work on is called the Shellfish Growers Climate Coalition, which actually Fisher's Island Oyster Farm was a founding member of. About 6 years ago, we had 7 farmers came to the Nature Conservancy and said, help, we're seeing all these impacts of climate change. We want to do something about it. Can you help us? And we said, yes, we want to work with you on this. So 7 farmers then. We have about 300 companies now that we're working with around the country. And so one of the things that we're working on, to the question, is a carbon footprint calculator, because the farmers want to know, where can I make things better? And so it's not a surprise, really, from the hatchery to the nursery to the farm, and then from the farm to the plate, that transportation is where the big impact is. So that's why I say buy your food from close by. That's really where it is. I mean, we're not done with the calculator. We know where it's going to go, and we know what the output is going to be. But farmers want to know it. That's what it's going to say. I have no doubt. Yeah, buy your food close by.
There are lots of examples of that, right? Like the thing that drives me the craziest is bottled water being shipped from like Fiji and France. I sort of can't process it, right? Especially because often, like, or you just, I don't know, just filter your tap water, Thank goodness we have glasses here, because often for these events, it's just like they're handing out bottles of water. And I think the thing that we often forget about plastic is that it's made from fossil fuels. It's not like some magical other material. Like there's fracking and drilling associated with that. And as we all do our best to lower our use of fossil fuels and put solar panels on our houses or drive an electric car or in these other ways lighten our impact on the planet, these fossil fuel corporations are like, oh, people aren't using as much gasoline, let's just turn it into water bottles. And so I think, and of course a lot of that's ending up in the ocean, tons and tons a year, and getting incorporated into the food chain, being found in our food system, right? And so that is all connected. I think it's one of the most mind-boggling things I can imagine. Like Evian, like why? Fiji water? Anyway.
Well, I have to say one of the things I'm happy to be working on this carbon footprint calculator, but reducing the carbon footprint of farms is not the big thing. And they want to do it, and so we're going to do it. And it's the thing that they're focused on. It's the thing that they're able to do, and very aware that it's not the big thing.
I would say though, we just need a million billion small important things. Like that's your business. Make it the best version of your business that you can.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that keeps sticking out to me about climate change, is that it's everything. We have to change our entire economy and society, and that means leaders in every sector, in every town, in every city, in every type of business. And I think so often when people think about what can I do, they're not thinking about that enough. The very specific, I don't know, like what's your job? Like, can you fix the place where you work? Can you invest in changing things in your town, as opposed to everything being some faraway decision that corporate executives and Congress makes? The solutions are all getting implemented locally. Yes, we need better federal climate policy and the funding that would come along with that. I work on that, I get it, but also like, it's your city council that decides if you have municipal composting or are investing in public transit, or in your mayors and the whole city government that's deciding on building codes and energy efficiency and the zoning stuff for sea level, right? These are all very local decisions. So I think your answer of local eating could just be rippled out to like local solutions in general, all adding up to something really significant. And one of the reasons that Urban Ocean Lab exists is to share these case studies of success, so that one city to another can say, we're doing this here. We can write up the analysis of lessons learned and best practices, because we don't have time to each muddle through and reinvent the wheel. So how can we say, oh, well, this cool thing is happening in New London or Bridgeport. Maybe we could do that in Massachusetts and on the Cape too. More of that I would love to see.
All right, so I'm gonna kind of switch things up here. We've talked about quite a lot, and you said a million billion little things. So we've got work to do. But how do we navigate the exhaustion that can come with climate change? These are big issues. So how do we navigate and move forward knowing that that is an issue as well?
I go for a walk in the woods every day. That's what
Yeah.
I do. I do that most days, and focus on what's right here. Yeah, I mean, taking a break, I think is absolutely essential. Yeah, go for a walk in the woods.
I do that a lot more now that I live in Maine. Music, I think there's not enough cultural engagement and contribution, I think, to the climate movement yet. We don't have the music and art and film and TV that are grappling with these issues, not in like a depressing documentary sense, but in a like, what is the world we want to build together? Show it, literally show it to me, motivate me to want to help create that version of the world. My number one trick is, pardon my French, I don't work with assholes. Because it is 100% about like, do you like the people you're doing this work with? Because it's hard and we have to work on climate solutions for the rest of our lives. So if you have a choice, choose very delightful collaborators and everything else will be much more pleasant. And yes, it's the sort of relay race and taking a break of it all as well. But I think one of the things I realized writing this book is that we're mostly following rules that don't really exist about what a book should be, about what a gathering should be, about how we implement climate solutions. It's like we're following an invisible rule book that literally doesn't exist. There is room for so much more creativity in how we approach all of this. And I think the thing that I try to do and embody when I'm a little less tired is how can we take climate change seriously, but absolutely under no circumstances take ourselves seriously. It's like we're just a bunch of flailing goofballs and we just need to admit it. We're all doing our best, or like many days doing our best, and that's all we can do, right? And so to me, like it's a huge relief knowing that I cannot solve climate change. First of all, the climate has already changed, and second of all, no one person can. And so the goal is just to be useful. Every day, just like wake up and see how you can be useful. And I see my role in this work as welcomer. Like how can I just like welcome more and more people into finding their roles? So if you also would like to be a welcomer, this is not an exclusive position, because we need everybody like with all their skills. And I think the more we like build the team, the less lonely it feels, and also the more wins we have and that sort of momentum that we can build where we see the successes happening is obviously very motivating. So yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot, but I would come back to on the personal level. For me, music is a huge part of what keeps me going. Actually, for those of you who have a book, first of all, thank you for buying my book. And also inside the back cover is my anti-apocalypse mixtape. I have listened to this so many times in the last year. I think I spent like 80 hours on this over the course of like 3 months. I was completely obsessed with getting all the right songs in all the right order. There's also a spreadsheet of the songs that didn't make the cut, but I like couldn't quite let go of, so I made a spreadsheet for them. And if you go to the book's website, you'll find lots of things, but a link to the playlist on Spotify and Apple is one of those things. So if you need a little boost or some consolation, I can offer you the music that does it for me too.
All right, so let's talk about, you said wins. Let's talk about communities that are doing it right. Who are some of the folks or organizations, communities that we can learn from as we move forward tackling this?
So I mentioned the SOAR program that I work on. So nature.org/SOAR, and you can see a list of currently 47 different projects that are underway, the 47 different little things that are happening all around the coast, like the ones that I've talked about, that are underway right now.
So the ones that I mentioned, plus there are some projects where, like in the Gulf of Mexico, where they're converting their refrigeration systems on shellfish farms to solar. There's a project up in Maine where they're experimenting with non-plastic aquaculture gear. There's
Maine Ocean Farms.
yeah. There's another project where they're developing in a hatchery climate resilient oysters, climate monitoring devices on farms, recycling shell, growing seaweed to buffer climate impacts. All these different companies are doing these things all over the place. And actually, I'm right in the middle right now of, so we're six months into a 2-year funding cycle. So 6 months in, we're checking in with all these projects, and it's so fun. Because they're far enough in that they're just getting started, they're just underway, they've got pictures to share, and I was, down in Georgia, got to meet with people, and so you can you can see the enthusiasm, because people had these ideas in their heads. They shared the ideas with us, and now they're doing them. So they're happening. They're all over the place, and it's really exciting. And in the next 18 months, we'll be able to share it out even further, so that we can kind of spread them like little seeds.
Along those same lines, I sit on the board of GreenWave, which is a nonprofit that's supporting this development of this sort of new in the U.S. sector of ocean farming. Obviously, farming oysters, shellfish, and seaweed has been happening for centuries around the world. But growing into a whole sector of the economy is something that's new. And thinking about how people are getting trained for these green jobs, blue jobs. And so GreenWave has been training young farmers, helping to create the market for the seaweed, right? Great if you can grow it, but if no one wants to buy it, that's not gonna be very helpful. And so it's been really interesting being on that board for the last few years and starting to understand, this is how do you grow a whole new sector of the economy, a whole new business of the farmers, of the equipment that they need, of the processing facilities. How can we do this also in a way that doesn't repeat the problems of industrial agriculture, that doesn't have this consolidation of all the ocean ownership and profits in the hands of a very few people, right? How can we have something that really supports the communities in which these businesses are located? And so the very last interview in my book is with the co-founder and co-executive director of GreenWave, Bren Smith, a very dear colleague. And the reason that he gets the last word in terms of the 20 interviews is because we haven't actually gotten that sector wrong yet. When we think about what if we get it right, in most situations, it's okay, we have to undo all these bad ways and rebuild something different sort of while we're all still operating. And it's very hard, and we're gonna do it anyway, but it's very hard. But in many significant ways with ocean farming, we haven't gotten it wrong at scale yet, and I think that's really exciting. Not only do we have a whole new generation of people coming into this work, but there is a more distributed nature of the business model, which I think is exciting. And also, a vast majority of the people who are taking these farmer training programs are young women. So you're seeing this very interesting demographic development within that space as well. So I'm on the board. I'm so committed to this being successful from a complementary approach. So yeah, I would agree. That's really promising.
So let's talk about some takeaways that we can all take home. What are maybe 1 or 2 things that someone can take right now to help the oceans, but in turn also help their neighbors?
Well, the most obvious thing is to eat local oysters, right?
The most delicious recommendation of all time.
Yeah, so you can do that. It's good for you, it's good for the environment, and it's good for the local companies.
So that's easy. Yes, I agree. And we're in the middle of a crazy election. I know this is on a lot of our minds. We can't actually address climate issues at scale if we don't have politicians who get it and who want to be ambitious about addressing the climate crisis that we face, and who are going to put the money into this transformation that is needed. So I think the number one thing we can all do from now until the election is make sure that for every position up and down the ballot, we are working to elect climate candidates. And so on my book tour with me, I'm bringing Environmental Voter Project, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit focused on just getting environmentalists to vote. Because there are so many people who are already registered and already have environment and climate as their number one issue, but do not cast their ballot. Does anyone have an idea how many people fall in that category? Too many, yeah.
10 billion, I listened to your podcast.
Oh, God. Oh, gosh. The Malinowskis are on to me. I think, so in the 2020 presidential election, it was 8 million environmental voters who did not vote. In the 2022 midterm election, it was 10 or 12 million. And we know how close elections are, right? So it really matters that we get those folks to the polls, because the hardest things to do are register people and get them to prioritize environment, because there's so many other big issues that we're dealing with, right? And so getting these, the environmental movement has a voter turnout problem, as the founder of EVP would tell you, Nathaniel Stinnett. And so they're coming on tour with me. If you want to volunteer with them, call people, remind them to go vote, text them, send postcards, knock on doors, whatever. They're doing phone banks like every night from now until the election, and you don't have to advocate for a candidate, you just have to remind them to vote, because they're already registered and they already care. So you don't have to have these awkward conversations where you're advocating for a specific person, because I can't have those conversations with strangers, personally. I'm very shy on the phone. And then I'm also bringing with me Lead Locally, which supports down ballot climate candidates. So these city council members, port commissioners, public utility commissioners, mayors, et cetera, who are making these decisions that really affect us and our communities. And so they are, I'm just advocating for them. Volunteer with them, support them in whatever ways make sense for you, if that feels right. But like, vote for people who get it. Like, we have to, and push the candidates, especially the local ones who will listen to you because they want your vote. Ask them what they're gonna do. Get them to commit to things before the elections. You can hold them to those promises later. It's a little late to get new promises out of people in this election cycle, but that's what led to things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in climate solutions in world history, right? We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, and the creation of the American Climate Corps, which I'm so proud that we now have in this country. My dear friend Maggie Thomas was the lead instigator of that, and that idea came from the Jay Inslee campaign. And when he left the race, like really making us all think about climate, Elizabeth Warren picked up that idea. When she left the race, Bernie Sanders did, and they got passed on to Biden. And then Maggie Thomas, who had worked on almost all of those campaigns along the way, ended up in the White House. She's now special assistant to the president on climate, and made the administration create the American Climate Corps, which has already put 15,000 young people to work doing things like restoring wetlands, installing solar panels, reducing wildfire risk. And like, that's the thing that happens if we all focus on carrying the ideas forward, regardless of who's in office. So I don't spend a lot of time in politics, but I know that who we have representing us really matters. And it is actually up to us to shift the status quo, because the secret that I've learned is that politicians are followers, not leaders. They want to get reelected. So they're like, what do my constituents want? What will get me enough votes? And if they start to hear, if more and more environmentalists actually vote, and if more and more of us speak up saying we need them to do more for coastal communities, for climate solutions, then we'll actually get it. So there's lots of possibility out there too. Sorry, that was quite long, but please vote for climate leaders.
Eat local oysters, vote for climate leaders. So those are your two things to take home and to think about. All right, so final question. I guess it's a two-part question. Maybe it's two questions. Anyway, how do you both hope that the ocean will have an impact on people in the future? And what if, like Dr. Johnson's book suggests, we actually do get it right?
Funny, I wrote a whole book about it, and I chose my words so carefully in there that extemporaneously answering the question is actually really hard. It's a big question.
So I have someone or an organization that, if you hop in the Wayback Machine, got it right, who still inspires me now. And and that's the Oyster Recovery Partnership. They're focused on the Chesapeake Bay. And so 20 years ago, I worked in the House of Representatives for a member who was focused on the Chesapeake, and that was when the Oyster Recovery Partnership was just getting started. And they were teeny, and they were so insistent that they had a good idea, that restoring depleted oysters was going to do a lot of good things. It was going to be good for habitat, for water quality, for jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a new idea then. And, but nobody really thought that they didn't have any momentum, they didn't have any money, they didn't have any political oomph, and the problem was too big. But they just kept at it. And they still keep at it. And, and the Chesapeake now is starting to see all of those good things happening because these people just stuck with it. 20 years later. I remember meeting with these people and thinking, oh, what a great idea. And it was a good idea. And they were just, they saw it. They saw it as an urgent thing. It was in their backyard. They cared about it deeply, and they just focused on it, and they continue to focus on it. So, when we find our thing and we focus on it and we stick with it, like those Oyster Recovery Partnership people in the Chesapeake, then we're going to have an impact on our future, just like they did 20 years ago for us now. So.
I think if we get it right, we're looking to the ocean for solutions. I think that is the major mindset shift I would like to see. There's so many examples of the ways in which that's true. And we're sort of respecting our place in the web of life, because this human thing where we think we can engineer all of nature to suit our whims, it just doesn't work, especially in the context of a rapidly accelerating climate crisis, right? So the humility that is required for this next phase of our species is significant, right? In that way that we can't hold back the entire ocean. We can't just keep rebuilding in the same places after a storm and think that's gonna be fine. But I did just want to echo this determination that you talk about, right? That is required in this moment. We're gonna have to champion ideas that don't gain traction and just keep at it for decades. Building the coalitions, bringing more people into the work. And one of the fun to me, maybe to you, but that I did in writing this book was I underlined all the words that I thought, the terms I thought would help point us towards solutions. And all of those are collected, 150 so or those on the inside of the front cover. So the book is kind of like a treasure hunt to find where all these words are. They're all underlined in blue. They're very easy to find. It's not that hard. And they appear in order. And the first word is love. And that's not like a fluffy thing, actually. that is what drives us to do the work that we do, whether that's love of nature, love of future generations. It's actually, there's polling data on this. The number one thing that motivates people towards climate action is love for future generations. Like 12 times more powerful a motivator than like green jobs or profitability. So that's where we start, and then it ends. The last word is tenacious. And that is the word that I just keep coming back to. Like, we have to be relentless, tenacious. Like, to your question and earlier on, like, it is overwhelming, right? And there is all this climate anxiety, and it is too big for any one person to save whatever the thing is. But that doesn't mean we get to give up just because it's hard. Like, what do you do, give up on life on Earth? Like, no, it's not a viable option. So I think I'm just really excited to see now that more and more people have their eyes open about the problem, now that more and more people are talking not only about the problems, but the solutions, that will just grow in numbers, doing our like practical, necessary stuff in ways that delight ourselves and each other, and sort of see how far we get. Because it's not about perfection. It's not about like apocalypse or paradise. It's anything in between. So like, how close can we get to that best possible future?
Amazing. So thank you to both of you for all of this. I mean, you touched on so many things. Yeah. So now we want to get to some questions. Anyone have a question for Dr. Johnson?
Oh,
All right.
First, I want to thank the two of you for a very, very inspiring talk. I've been involved in restoration, ecological restoration of terrestrial landscapes for a long time. And to hear about the far greater part of the planet today, it's been wonderful. I particularly appreciated your emphasis, both of you, on concrete, small-scale projects that people can undertake personally, because I think it's really our best protection against despair and paralysis when we look at climate change. But I also think, I've come to believe recently that the threat, the existential threat of climate change is also a huge opportunity. That it's arisen because of a really destructive, selfish attitude that most of humanity has taken towards nature for centuries or millennia. And now, if we're going to have a future, we have to change to a more positive involvement with nature. And I think this is, as I say, a tremendous opportunity to effect a deep cultural change that's going to go way beyond, leavening of environmentalists. I'd love to hear your reactions to that. I mean, do you feel that? Do you think it's an opportunity? And
oh, there's a lot of money to be made in climate solutions. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the fastest growing energy sector is solar. It's growing 30% in the last year. Like, those are crazy numbers, right? Catching photons, it's like brilliant. Why have we not just been doing this? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as these new sectors grow, these are business opportunities.
But can we move beyond reducing nature to just as a source of dollars and cents or resources?
Okay, different question entirely. What do you think?
I think so. I hope so. I mean, I think we have to if we're going to live on, if we're going to lead with love. That's what it requires. So, unfortunately, what I was thinking is we have so many more of those little projects that I'm talking about than we can fund. And so I'm always talking to USDA and to NOAA about how about, you should be taking this up too, because the private money that we get, it's gonna run out. And so, but the federal government wants to know, wants to put metrics to it, and love is not one of the metrics. I mean, I want love to be one of the metrics. I don't know.
Yes, I want to second that. Thank you. I thought the questions were great and the answers were fascinating. I thoroughly enjoyed this. And I have a much more pedantic question. So eating fish. So medical things tell you to eat fish, but the ocean doesn't have enough fish for all these people to eat. So how do you deal with that when people think they're being so great by being a pescatarian and the fish comes from Thailand or, I don't know, Madagascar? How do we talk to people about what is happening with the ocean and maybe why we shouldn't be eating fish?
Well, I would say, like I said before, think about where it came from. I mean, if you see that something came from Thailand or wherever, I wouldn't buy it. That's too far. That's just too far. You know, I mean, there's who knows how it was grown. You don't know. I think you can, in a circumstance like that, you can boil it down to, pretty simple terms like that, and just know where it came from. People ask me all the time, well, would you, when you're out to eat, well, would you order this? And more often than not, my answer is no, because you just don't know where it came from. But if you do know, you go to a restaurant and it's very clear where it came from. You know exactly where it came from, and it came from, down the street, and you know the purveyor, then go for it.
Yeah, it's been a bit frustrating how far behind the ocean part of things has lagged behind the land part, right? Farm to table and farmers markets and all of this, we're all very familiar with. It's sort of obvious to people, but many people, including restaurateurs and chefs, do not take the same approach to seafood where they think about local and knowing your fishermen, right? The know your farmer is a whole thing, and know your fisherman is not. So I would just say we can apply the same metrics to food from the sea as we would to food on land in that way. And just eat lower on the food chain. Like, eat the bait fish.
If we have time for one more question, so it's a really, really good one.
Oh!
It's a lot of pressure. So I teach at UConn, and UConn has an environmental literacy requirement. I've actually used All We Can Save since it was published. It's covered in stickers, and the Climate Ven is such a great tool. And I was wondering, Dr. Johnson, how you think What If We Get It Right becomes part of the Welcomer Club, and what you think this new book brings to bringing people in.
I don't know. I mean, it's been out in the world exactly 1 week, 1 week and 2 days, and I'm very sleepy. I think, so for those of you not familiar with All We Can Save, this anthology of essays by women climate leaders that I co-edited with Dr. Catherine Wilkinson came out in September of 2020, and to everyone's surprise, it was a bestseller. Surprising because anthologies do not sell well because we have this cult of the individual in America. And also surprising because it was a bunch of very earnest essays about climate. And they weren't all about solutions. It was a lot of heartfelt, how do we deal with being humans in this moment kind of stuff. And that book has found its way into, I think, 150 different school curriculums, which is amazing because it's more likely to be read than everyone else who buys books like me and they just stack up next to your bed, right? The good intentions of it all. And so obviously working on that inspired, among other things, other sources of inspiration, this book. You'll recognize the marginal notations of what I think is important or very sweet or very concerning with the hearts and the asterisks and the exclamation points. There's also poetry in this. I think poetry is so important to give us, to make us feel like what we're feeling has been felt before and people lived through it. And just to take a breath and step back and think of things from a new perspective. Likewise, there's also art in this book as well, by Ola Lake and Jay Foose, this incredible artist he calls his genre retro-futurist salvage punk, which I think will make sense once you look at it. But the tone of this book is completely different. All We Can Save, I obviously have an enormous sweet spot for in my heart. It is so earnest. It is so emotional. And this book is like you're eavesdropping on dinner table conversations with my friends, and we're giving each other a hard time. We're like, explain yourself, what are you even talking about? Do you really believe that? What is the dorkiest climate solution we're overlooking, right? It's, by definition, conversational. It's 20 interviews, and of course, my own essays, etc. But it really is an attempt to, I don't know, I think there's something about the conversational format that's hopefully more welcoming and relatable, because we're just normal people trying to like talk through it. And there's a reading guide, and it's being considered already for first year reads at different colleges, which is super exciting. And for those of you who don't know about this climate Venn diagram, that's this 3 circles. What are you good at? What needs doing, and what brings you joy? We've all got to find our way to that sweet spot in the middle. You can download a worksheet for this on the book website too, getitright.earth. I don't know, I just feel like I'm going on like a 20-city tour. You guys are number 3 or 4, and we'll see what happens. I mean, it's a crazy media landscape, but the embrace of the book so far has been incredibly heartwarming, because it's a climate book. Like, no one wants to read a climate book, right? But it's doing really well out in the world, and we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I think this don't take ourselves too seriously part, I hope this can get at that a bit.
Thank you all for your questions and for the information that you shared, answering those questions, definitely very insightful. So this will conclude our program, but we do, I think, want to pull a winning wrap